You're watching Fox 13, the most powerful name in local news.
It seems to happen every time we have a major tragedy. Everyone is asking who is to blame. And that is the case right now with two recent horror stories, that Italian cruise ship disaster and the Interstate 75 pileup here in Florida last weekend. So let's start with the Costa Concordia. 17 people dead as a result of the ship running aground almost 3 weeks ago now. Lawsuits filed by passengers and crew members have topped $500 billion. And the ship's captain is facing criminal charges around the world. Joining us this morning to talk about the legal ramifications of those incidents is our good friend, attorney Felix+Vega. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, KRISTIN. Good to be back.
Well, you know, those who've lost loved ones in either of these awful incidents feel like the tragedies could have been prevented and that there is blame to place. So on the Costa Concordia, let's start there. Two cases were filed this week, one in Miami, another in Chicago. Tell us who's involved and what you know about the two cases.
Well, the first case, to break it down, was filed in Miami State Court, and that involves 5 or 6 of the crew or the passengers that were involved in that case. It was for a suit for $460 million. They sued in Miami because Carnival's headquarters are in Miami, so that's why they chose that jurisdiction. We're going to get to some of the problems with that in just a second. Okay. The second suit deals with a crew member that was filed in Chicago federal court, and that has to do with basically the evacuation procedures. It was a $100 million suit that was filed by that crew member named Gregory Baton. And that was filed because he has substantial business in Illinois. Again, that seems to be a problem. So both these suits, the basics of it are it's negligence and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The negligence has to do with the actions of the captain on what he did on the Costa Concordia. Essentially, you have a 114,000-ton vessel that he's in charge of. And what he did, obviously, he took it 5 miles off course to basically do a flyby around Giglio Island. So the negligence comes from, one, he took that off a pre-programmed course and endangered all those people. He got within 150 yards of the coastline. You see Captain Francesco Schettino there. Yeah. So when you're talking about his negligence in this action, you're talking about that big of a vessel. And when you talk about how big it is, think of 4 747s lined up on a runway. That's how long this ship is.
Huge.
And that's why they're facing the negligence charges there, and for essentially terrorizing the passengers with everything that they went through in the evacuation procedures as well.
Right, you can only imagine. And it makes sense to file the lawsuits here in the U.S. since Carnival is an American company.
Correct.
But as you alluded to, there are some hurdles that lawyers are going to have to deal with in order to keep the cases going in the United States. Explain that.
There was 2 interesting things I found out. One, in 1974, there was a treaty that was signed called the Athens Convention, and basically that was a treaty that was put together by several countries governing passengers' rights on cruise ships.
Okay.
So it explains your liabilities, where they could sue, what jurisdiction the cruise lines had, what jurisdiction the passengers had. And essentially what it sets out is the fact that you are able to sue if your cruise ship leaves from a U.S. port. You can sue the company, like, for example, in this case, Carnival Cruise, within the United States. It's in actually in your contract as well. I actually pulled the contract from the Costa Concordia, and the interesting thing here, which the lawyers for the passengers have already acknowledged, is the fact that you actually give up your right to sue within the United States because it doesn't come to a U.S. port, and Section 2B right there says that they vest jurisdiction in Genoa, Italy, under Italian law. So getting around the contract that all these passengers signed, that's going to be the biggest hurdle for them keeping the suits here in the U.S.
It certainly will. Now, let's talk about the I-75 pileup here in Florida. It's been 1 week since it happened last Sunday on 75. A dense layer of smoke and fog blanketed the highway. 11 people killed. Now, could there be criminal charges filed as well as lawsuits here?
There could be criminal charges because, as we found out, there were no lightning strikes in the area. There were no controlled burns that were approved in the area. And essentially what happened is they're looking at whether or not this was an arson that set the fire, or an arsonist that set the fire on Payne's Prairie. The problem with then saying that that person's responsible for all these deaths as Andy Johnson was explaining last week when you guys were talking about how the fog and the smoke layered over together and then settled onto the roadway, was that an intervening cause? And a lot of the witness statements all describe this whiteout conditions that happened in terms of the accidents that were occurring. So no one saw who crashed into who was the first crash that occurred, and that's really going to take away from the liability. Also, FHP was coming under fire for reopening the road from an earlier closure in the day, or that night actually, regarding the smoke and the fog as well. Again, that comes down to their procedures, and it's a judgment call on their part whether or not to open the road. So
that's a lot of questions.
It's be interesting to see.
Yeah, definitely. We love your insight. Thank you so much for being with us.
Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
With everything you need to start your morning, this is Good Day Tampa Bay.
For a quick check now on the stories that are making headlines around the world, the U.S. is calling it a major blow to the people of Syria. The United Nations voted to remove Syria's president from power, but both Russia and China have vetoed the resolution. This comes in the middle of another deadly weekend for protesters. More than 200 were killed in just the past few days. Thousands of people are now rallying at Syrian embassies around the world, calling for a change at the top. Russia's decision may have been motivated by money. The country is a major arms dealer, and Syria is said to be one of its biggest clients. And in Iran, Iran's Revolutionary Guard just began new military exercises. It's another show of force by Iran after also threatening to shut down a major oil supply route. Iranian leaders are also warning against any attacks on Tehran's nuclear facilities. Israel's defense minister Ehud Barak said in a major policy speech last week that now is the time to strike the nuclear program. Here locally, groups are hoping tensions with Iran don't escalate into war. The St. Pete for Peace protesters demonstrated on the corner of Gandy Boulevard and Dale Mabry in Tampa on Saturday. It was part of the National Day of Action on Iran. They say they don't want to see the U.S. go to war with another Mideast nation. The group marched then to MacDill Air Force Base. And the Occupy camp in Washington, D.C. clears out, but not without a fight. Riot police had to storm the site Saturday, tearing down tents. Camping gear is banned under park rules. Most protesters left on their own, but others fought with police. One officer was even hit in the face with a brick. 7 people ended up being arrested. Police say the protesters can still make their voices heard, but they cannot stay in the park overnight. Now for a check of the weather, here's Lindsay.
It fights crime.
And that commercial aired during the Super Bowl today, now just a couple of hours away. Most of us will watch from home, but a lucky few are actually in Indianapolis to see the big showdown. The question is, can the city handle the huge crowds? Concern grew this weekend after 11 people got hurt after a pre-Super Bowl concert Friday night. About 50,000 people flooded the Super Bowl village, and they were packed in like sardines for blocks. Making matters worse, police say a lot of people in that crowd were drinking. Several got trampled. No one was hurt too badly, thankfully. Officials expect about 200,000 people to take over Indianapolis today for the big game. And they say fan security is their top concern. Another crowd was getting a lot of attention this weekend as well, but this was for good reason. Locals in Indianapolis put together a Super Bowl flash mob. Thousands of people broke out into a planned dance number entertaining the Super Bowl visitors. The mob says they had members from all over central Indiana. And it's a New York Giants state of mind in the Big Apple today. Even the Empire State Building got in the Super Bowl spirit last night, lighting up the top in blue in honor of its hometown team, Big Blue. The building usually changes its colors to mark certain holidays and special events, and this is definitely a holiday for New York sports fans. And both teams got in their final practices before the big game today. They also got in the traditional team photo inside Lucas Oil Stadium. It's not every day you get to play in the most watched sporting event in the world. Right now, the Patriots are favored by only a few points. I'm still pulling for the Giants. And before we go to break, a look at today's celebrity birthdays, including singer Bobby Brown. Good Day continues right after this.